Summer is a great time to cut back invasive plants that cannot be uprooted for whatever reason. Whether it's too big for you to uproot, or you're worried about the erosion, the disturbance it's going to create. You want to cut back some plants. Summer's a great time to do that. Plants contain the most above ground energy during the reproductive phase, right? After it flowers, while it's developing fruit. So when you cut back at this time, that maximizes the amount of energy removed, increases the chance of weakening or killing. And how you do this can make a difference too. So think of the opposite of how you would properly prune a bush. This image on the left actually had good cut, bad cut, but I just removed that. This is our good cut, bad cut for our purposes, which is, and I don't take this lightly to hurt the plant. You can see on the right, well, let's start with the left, right? We made the cut past the collar, really discourages regrowth, and this is a normal pruning on the right. This is these were two bushes very close to each other, not the same bush, but you can see the regrowth where it's coming from that other pruning. Summer is also a great time to prevent prolific seeders from seeding. For some of these plants, that's really the only way to help control them. Start with chaff flower. You may or may not be familiar, and if you're familiar with it, I am sorry. The best way to remove it is to dig it up. You want to get that full root system out carefully as you can. Repeated cutting can prevent it from seeding, but it will not kill the plant. Now, as it matures throughout the season, it gets exponentially harder to deal with. As those seeds become present, they will stick to you very easily. If you get close to that plant in the fall, the seeds disperse everywhere, and they can travel with you on your shoes, on your clothing. And when those seeds are present, it's very important to take great care to bag and trash as many as you can. Now, here's another one that's very difficult to control. It's still grass. It's an annual grass. So you think that it would be easy to deal with, but it is not, because it's so abundant and it seeds so much. The timing is key with this one. For best results, you want to allow it to grow up until right before it seeds, and that can be tricky. You don't want to get too risky with it and then run out of time. But in Atlanta, we've noticed that it goes to seed pretty much mid-August into September and throughout the rest of the summer and into fall. But if you let it grow tall, it's much more easy to pull out bigger handfuls. You can see that the bottom right photo's got a giant handful of it. Easier to pull out when it's that tall. And if you start early in spring pulling it out, again, you're going to stimulate more seed germination. You're just going to make more of it. One key point, so it travels very well with water. It's in our waterways. It travels through rain events. It'll travel downhill. So when you're starting on an infestation, you want to start uphill or upstream as best you can. And you don't want to rake this. In the fall and the winter, it turns into that brown, matte looking carpet on the ground. You don't want to rake that around or unknowingly move it around. You want to make sure you can ID it if it's in your landscape. Here's a couple of lookalikes. So we have our native whitegrass, also called Virginia cutgrass is another name for it. But these two grasses like to inhabit the same areas. Wet areas, shady areas. A couple of key differences. Stiltgrass has that very distinguishable silver streak. It's just off center on the leaf blade. It's also a much more robust, taller grass than the Learsia. And Learsia is a perennial grass. That's obviously a key difference, though it's pretty delicate. And with that, we're going to get into Laura's portion for summertime.
All right, so one of the great things about native plants and one of the reasons that a lot of people like to put them in their yard is they don't generally need as much upkeep, as much watering as lawns or a lot of non-native ornamentals. However, You do need to water your newly planted and transplanted plants in the summer here in Atlanta. This is something y'all might already know that. I did not, and I thought if something said drought tolerant and I stuck it in the ground in June, it would be fine. It's drought tolerant. But the roots are not yet established, so you gotta give it, at least a couple of seasons to get established before you put it out there on its own and expect it to be just fine. And you want to do that watering when it's really hot, which is most of the summer here, either early in the morning or in the evening so that your plants don't get sunburnt. There's also, I'm going to talk about deadheading and the Chelsea chop, which are some ways to kind of improve the appearance of native plants. These can enable you to use like more stray species versus cultivars, but also have them look a little bit more compact and bloom longer in your landscape. So deadheading is cutting off the spent flower blooms to prolong blooming or prevent unwanted seeding. And so this can be used to extend the blooms throughout the season on plants like coreopsis, phlox, sunflowers, coneflowers. It can also be used, like I mentioned, like with the ragwort. It has the windblown seeds, so if you don't want it to spread everywhere, you can deadhead the seed heads so that you kind of minimize that spread. This does prevent the seed production that could be eaten by wildlife. So one thing you can do is either leave the seed heads or leave the flowers at the end of the season and only do this early in the season, or only do this on flowers in the more prominent areas of your home and then leave others to go to seed for wildlife. The Chelsea chop is a way to delay or prolong blooming of native plants and to also give them a more compact appearance. So it can be really useful with some of the really tall native plants that can get leggy or floppy. If they're late summer or fall bloomers, what you can do is you can cut them back by about 1/3 to 1/2 early in the season. It needs to be like after they've got a lot of like vegetation, but before they get their flower buds. And then you can do this on goldenrod, asters, Joe Pye weed, ironweed, and then they will end up having a more compact, bushier appearance. And if you do it on the entire plant, like in the bottom picture here, then that can delay the blooming until later. You can also do it on part of the plant, and then the ones you don't cut will bloom sooner, and then the other ones will bloom later, and so it can prolong the blooming of the plant. So there's some, it's a fun thing to kind of experiment with and see what you like. So for summer interest, lots of beautiful flowers coming out at this time of year. For sunnier areas, we've got purple coneflower. The coneflowers in general the seeds are great for birds later in the year, and they're pollinator magnets early in the summer. Butterfly weed is a milkweed, so it's a larval host for monarchs. It's a little bit shorter and more compact than some of the other milkweeds, so it's nice for smaller garden areas. It has this bright orange color. And then summer phlox, as you can see, has bright flowers and also attracts pollinators. For shadier areas, these are some great options. Great blue lobelia can handle part shade or I think even full shade. It blooms from July to October for a long time and it has these bright blue flowers. Eastern columbine is great for a woodland garden. It has really interesting flowers, likes part to full shade. It can bloom all the way from February to July. Woodland sunflower can get up to 5 feet tall and it can handle sun to shade. Sunflowers are also a keystone species, which means that they are a species that provides a lot of wildlife benefits. So they're a great thing to try to figure out where you can work it in, and this is a way you can do that even in shadier areas. There's some really interesting vines in the summer. Vines in general can be pretty aggressive. So before you plant one, you want to make sure that you have room for it to spread as much as it's going to. Purple passion flower, also called maypop, is really interesting flowers, and I think this is a great vine If you are planting a garden where you have kids that are going to be enjoying it, or you want a pollinator garden, it's a host plant for the Gulf fritillary caterpillar, and it will get absolutely covered in caterpillars in the fall. I planted this along the chain link fence at my kids' school because it is one that will get up to like 30 feet long. So you definitely want to make sure you have space for it. But if you do, it'll end up with really cool flowers and then lots of caterpillars and then lots of butterflies. It also produces fruit, which is the maypop fruit. So it just has a lot of wildlife benefits all around. American wisteria and virgin bower are both native summer bloomers that also have invasive look-alike. So the native wisteria is going to be much better behaved than the non-native wisterias. So it has more of a shrub-like appearance. One of my neighbors actually has this growing on his mailbox, and as you can imagine, if it was the non-native wisteria, it probably would have swallowed his whole house. The flowers bloom later, they're summer bloomers versus the spring bloom of the exotic wisterias, and they also have this more pine cone shape, a more compact flower form. And so they can be a really beautiful addition, and I've recommended this to people before who are like, wisteria, I don't think so. I'm like, no, I promise this will play more nicely because it's part of this ecosystem. The native versus the invasive clematis is a little trickier in that the flowers and the growth habit can be very similar, but the key thing to look for is that the invasive clematis has the smooth edges of the leaves, whereas the native has toothed leaves. So during the summer, there's some beautiful trees and shrubs to add to your yard. So smooth hydrangea is one of our native hydrangeas, cultivar that has abundant, prominent white flowers, and it's long blooming and can be really beautiful in the landscape. This is actually something that was planted in my house before I moved in by someone who was not even looking for native plants. So it's popular and readily available for landscaping purposes. Summer sweet, or Clethra alnifolia, is a pollinator magnet. It can kind of spread and colonize, but you can prune it to keep it in check. And then Carolina rose is it's a native rose that grows to between 1 to 3 feet high, so it's a lower shrub that also kind of spreads and colonizes. And unlike most roses, it can handle part shade.